Good afternoon. Thank you for joining Innovations in Architectural Practice. My name is Carl Dobman, and I'm an associate professor, and I'm joined by Kathy Belikov and Anya Sirota. And the three of us are going to present a range of work that we've been looking at as it relates to innovations in architectural practice, and also probably talk about the relationship to architectural education for these. For myself, I'm going to talk about three different types of practices that I've been involved with since my time at Michigan. And I want to use these three practices and these three projects as a way to talk about innovations as they relate to technology. And then my partners will talk about other types of innovations through their work. So the three, see where this goes. So my interest has been in technology, and this relates to design, computer-aided design and manufacturing and digital fabrication and robotics. And maybe as a way to prioritize some of these things, there's a lot of advances have happened in the last few years, especially related to technologies. So we can see a comparison here between a phone from 1983 and a very recent phone. The size, the technology, the quality, all of these things have changed rapidly. Being at the University of Michigan, we're also concerned about regional issues. So the car, and we can see the way that this has evolved, and specifically very recently. And one of the pressures that I continue to think about is construction. And for the most part, construction hasn't changed in the last 100 years, whether this is related to building houses or buildings in general. So the relationship to Detroit is something that's important to us, thinking about manufacturing, thinking about the big three. But this is what it looks like to be manufacturing now with robotics. And so the three projects that I want to look at are the Shadow Pavilion, work from Blue Homes, and a recent project that I'm working on called RoboPinch. The first is the Shadow Pavilion, and in this project, we developed our own software as a way to both think about what the form of the building might be, and as well as how it will be manufactured. So we can see using material, these were all cut with laser cutters, large sheets of aluminum. They could be assembled into a range of different forms and shapes. And then we also had the computer helping us to budget this. So we knew exactly how much the project was going to cost to laser cut it, an image of the completed pavilion, and the way that it collected the snow at the end. But the second group of projects or things that I wanted to just touch on quickly was manufacturing. And so in work with Blue Homes over the last 4 years, we've been looking at how to develop pre-manufacturing. And so this is the Lustron house as a historic example, but all the parts of the house laid out on a tarmac and being able to think about the quality of construction as well as how all of them come together. At Blue, we were using Revit as a way to capture all the information of all the products and all the features in the house and be able to customize them and mix and match them. The innovation here is that we could really change the design quickly in order to suit the specific customer's needs. And then we were also looking at how to manufacture and ship the house, so how it fit on a truck, how the house would fold, and then eventually be craned into place. So we could build a house and on site, it would be a matter of a few days before the house would be watertight in comparison to many months of construction in a traditional sense. And a couple of completed projects, both from California and from Massachusetts. And then the last project is a project that uses robots, industrial robots, to start to think about how we might build architectural models. And so we've been using plaster and robotics as a way to create fabric formwork and then use the robot to pinch and push and pull on that formwork as a way to make different types of forms. And so for here, it's really been the control and thinking about the relationship and the parameters between them that we could really dial in the specificity and the precision of building these models quickly and easily. And for us, it's also been about the relationship between designing something on the computer, being able to rapidly create formwork whether this is laser cut or cut with other industrial processes, and then using the robot as a way to distort that formwork and create the final form. So a couple of images of what might be really complex, simple forms that are easy for us to make, but actually quite difficult for us to model. And so it's been this relationship of thinking about how we design, how we make models, and also how we start to draw and represent these things. And I think these are important aspects as it relates to education in ways that we're trying to think about how to project some of these notions forward, to think about architectural education and the way that that might inform architectural practice. And I think that's our interest today in terms of thinking about innovations in architectural practice. Here are a couple views of assembled models. And then I think this is my last image. So that's my last image, and I'm going to hand the phone over to Anya now, and then we'll pick up again in a few minutes with questions and answers.
Thank you, Carl. I'm just going to advance to the next slide. Great. This is Anya Sirota, and I'm incredibly happy to be speaking with you at this virtual conversation and to present some of the recent work that I've been involved in. My research and practice is very different from Carl's and Kathy's, and it focuses on architecture as a mode of social practice in the built environment. Okay. What we do is we test ideas about how design can sponsor activity, how we might be able to transform spaces that we know or places that we know into situations and modes of exchange for activity and visibility for spaces in the city. The success of this approach is often dependent upon architecture's capacity to build diverse networks of concerned and inspired people. And we're interested in figuring out how to activate those networks in order for them to imagine and produce alternate collective futures in the built environment. So today I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples of projects that we've worked on so that we can understand the logics of social practice and design in the public realm and how they play out. The first one that I'd like to talk to you about I developed with my colleague Mireille Rodier. It's a project called Imaging Detroit, which we staged in a public park in Detroit a few years back. It was a 36-hour international film festival and pop-up agora, and it was produced in a kind of undermanaged park in an economically challenged neighborhood in East Detroit. The festival featured an extended, curated set of documentaries, publications that were all produced on the subject of Detroit over the course of the last 10 years. Excuse me. So what was included in this event were 51 films, 100 publications, 32 discourse jockeys, 6 topical sessions for conversations, 36 hours of nonstop film screenings, food carts, installations in the landscape, and most importantly, there were some 500 Detroit residents and cultural enthusiasts brought together to collectively discuss how Detroit had been represented in the recent past. There were also 4 pavilions, temporary, they were informal, I would say vernacular, reusable. They were built to create a space for open discussion where multiple publics could interact with the assembled material as well as with each other in order to sort of share and disseminate knowledge. The pavilions were temporary urban markers. They announced that public programming was happening here in this kind of unlikely scenario. And they also revealed the possibility of an ephemeral urbanization. So in its aim to spark conversations about the many ways in which Detroit had been imaged in the last decade, we staged a public event and an open conversation about the power of image making and how those images might be projected to produce a new urban imaginary. And at the same time, we were producing our own images. So we were altering the image of the city. These were images that were not about ruination or economic Armageddon, but about a vibrant civic possibility using minimal architectural means. More recently, we've extended this experimental technique for urban activation to a broader neighborhood scale, launching the 1 Mile Project. 1 Mile is based in Detroit's North End, and it was developed in collaboration with a group of community artists, activists, residents. Its aim is to activate 1 linear mile of historic Oakland Avenue, which was once the unofficial cradle of funk and of rhythm and blues. The first of our interventions has been the construction of a Parliament Funkadelic-inspired mothership designed as a mobile broadcast and DJ unit and a marker for the project. In support of the 1 Mile project and the launch of this mothership, 12 members of Parliament Funkadelic reunited to perform at this opening. This event was kind of unprecedented. It was free and open to the public, and it took place in a very unlikely location, an unmarked garage on Oakland Avenue. And here we see an image of some of the musicians, Amp Fiddler, Carl Butch Small, T. Money Green, Walter Hazmat Howard. The energy and the kind of renewed sense of identity that this event spawned in an economically vulnerable urban context was truly palpable. There were some audience members that brought their original record albums from the 70s. Others, outside of the garage venue, took photos of themselves in front of the mothership. But most importantly, the 1 Mile project came as a response to an unprecedented drive for blight remediation in the neighborhood, where a historically uninformed and accelerated demolition plan currently threatens to erase some important buildings and cultural vestiges. So in this context, we imagine that 1 Mile and its mothership marker could be a call to conserve, to restore, to amplify Detroit's cultural innovations, both at a kind of local and a national scale. All of this to say that architecture can serve as a platform for space making and also as a site for activism. Recently, for instance, with students from the Master of Science in Conservation program, we staged a public event and temporary gallery on the rooftop of Detroit's Packard Automotive plant. Designed in response to the infamous building's impending sale at auction, the project guided participants through a kind of complex urban scenario and asked them to speculate about the site's possible collective futures. And here we see a group of students getting ready for the event and sort of clearing off the site. The iconic Packard plant had been in a state of constant degradation for more than a half-century, producing a kind of strange and provocative, painful urban scenario. Our intervention, affectionately titled Interrobang, sought to transform the site, however briefly, into a public and inhabitable venue for collective dialogue. And we see students here leading a guided tour. And this is what the site looked like on the interior of the space, where an invited public was discussing the possibility of alternate futures for the site. So the intervention itself was unassuming. It was just a clearing of a path and installation of handrails, an exhibition of the model and publication as well as the research. But what it did was conceptually powerful because it suggested that there's a possibility for reimagining, reappropriating, recuperating, and activating sites using simple techniques for positive change. And so I'll end that and pass it over to my colleague, Kathy Belikov, an assistant professor here, who's a partner at RVTR and a co-founder of the Metropolitan Futures Group.
Hello, my name is Kathy Belikov, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of the innovative experimental work that I undertake with my research practice. We explore design at two scales. On the left is some of our work at the material scale of building skins, where we develop new sensor-integrated, climate-adaptive, and human-responsive material assemblies for future architectures. And on the right is some of our work at the scale of urban design. What ties these two scales together, and what is at the basis of innovation in our work, is what can be called the ecological approach. To inform our work, we study phenomena such as complex systems, networks, emergence, biology, and interaction. We consider all architecture as interconnected and in constant feedback and coevolution with landscapes, with the environment, with energy, information, humans, and socio-political forces. So let me describe how this plays out in our urban design work. This is a recent project for a new mobility network in Chicago that conceived of the space of transit stations as open-source urban platforms that could be integrated with new mobility technologies and that could also multitask to provide social amenities. Not only do Chicago's bus and train stations do only one thing, and sometimes not very well, they are also poorly conceived of urban spaces. But they are located at key points in the city, and if they were rescripted and redesigned, they could better serve local populations and especially disadvantaged communities. So we looked at how we could integrate networks with these transit networks with other urban networks for more sustainable, equitable cities and enterprise, such as bike share, car share, smart delivery, distributed education, street exercise, co-working space, community meeting space, farmers markets, food carts, and greenways. And we developed design prototypes for what these might look like at specific sites, such as bus stops or underneath in the space beneath the underused elevated transit line that can be redesigned to work as an urban platform where multiple mobile services and community activities can plug in and make it a kind of social hub that really serves the community. The concept is kind of like the way a smartphone is a platform where multiple apps can come together. In order to be able to make informed decisions about local needs and opportunities, we have developed a method of using graphic information systems, or GIS, analysis, through which we map multiple data sets so we can investigate the geography of potential synergies and opportunities. So in this slide, we see Chicago's transit axis and transit deserts on the left, and medically underserved areas combined with health system access on the right. Another slide, on the left map, we see where a mapping of where people have access to learning opportunities, and on the right, the landscape of food access and food deserts. Another one of our urban projects that uses combinatory data set mapping as part of the analysis and design process is called Infra-Ecology Urbanism. The project was just on exhibition at the Yale School of Architecture and is opening at Taubman College here in January. It is a project about thinking and working on questions of urban society at a time when the city no longer possesses clear boundaries. Cities today sprawl across vast geographies. In many cases around the globe, it is no longer possible to discern where one metropolis ends and the next one begins. Researchers now use the term megaregion to describe these types of multi-centered continuous urban developments. Specifically, this project is situated in the Great Lakes megaregion, where we live, work, and teach. These shed cartographies that are on the screen spatialize the commodity flows of the megaregion, the emerging industries, the movement of people and goods, and the geography of renewable energy potential. This we are very interested in, since we believe that the post-carbon era's transition to a mix of fuel types and renewable resources will have a big impact on architecture, landscape, cities, social politics, and economics. The way we work and the way that we teach our students to work is speculatively. We pose what-if questions and then use design to explore their implications. In this project, we asked, what if the substantial yield from the megaregion's unexploited renewable energy resources could be harnessed as a common resource for infrastructural renewal and public works within the megaregion? Our research indicated that the point of leverage could be the highway, the spatial organizer of urban patterns in the region. We proposed to restructure the DNA of the highway from a simple, single-purpose and single-access surface to an intelligent bundled network. It would be grid-tied with renewable energy that could power electric vehicles, elevated high-speed rail, and could also carry high-capacity data, fresh water, and waste, all constructed in the space of its right-of-way. This new multiplexed conduit could run from Minneapolis to Montreal, reducing the need for short-haul air travel between cities along the line, such as Chicago, Detroit, and Toronto. We then proposed that the orphan space left over by highway interchanges could be used for the development of new mega-regional institutions along the line. These would not only be sites of exchange of travel and passengers, but also spaces for new amenities and collective programs. We developed detailed design proposals for several interchanges. Here at Detroit Windsor, we proposed an occupied extra-jurisdictional bridge that is both a space of regional decision-making as well as a site of international crossing and trade. In Chicago, we proposed a rhizomic system of built and open spaces that connect various transit lines with new institutions, housing, and water remediation. And near the Toronto airport, we proposed a complex in the form of a monumental landscape that becomes a new port of arrival, orientation, and congregation, as well as the site for a series of major sports and research facilities. All of these projects are explored through drawings, mappings, renderings, as well as large physical models. And of course, none of this work could occur without substantial research support and the help of numerous research assistants as well as interdisciplinary collaborators. So this ends my presentation and the presentations of my colleagues, and I think we'll now move to the question and answer session. So I encourage you all to submit your questions in the Q&A window, and we can have a group conversation.
So the first question that we're going to address just came in, and the question is, these practices seem to represent such a diverse range of approaches and interests. Did you know what area that you would be interested in specializing in going into your undergraduate or graduate education? That's a good question.
That is a great question. I guess I'll answer that first. I don't know, I'm curious how this works among the three of us. For myself, I actually grew up in a small fabrication shop, so I had always been around construction and manufacturing, and I moved away from it, and then through architecture school and when I started to practice, I came back to some of these ideas. How about for you guys? Wait, what? Just speak closer. So some people have asked that it became harder for people to hear. We just wanted to do it on the speakerphone so that the three of us could have a conversation. So we'll get closer to the speaker.
Okay. Hopefully people can hear me. This is Kathy. I would have to say that I didn't know that I was going to be doing any of this kind of work when I started architecture school, and in fact, after graduating, I spent a lot of time working in practice, working at both scales of work, both in the design of buildings and specific object design and interiors, and also working at the urban scale. And these two practice-related experiences really bracket the way that I work, kind of at these two scales. And it's really when I came back to teaching and working more intensively on research-based projects that I really developed the specific speculative methodologies, the mapping methodologies. These have all been a lot of the tools that we use have really been things that we've developed in the past 10 or so years. And so while I think my education kind of prepared me conceptually for this, I would say in terms of the skills, a lot of these came from practice and coming back to the academy afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And I would say on this end, my undergraduate education was in semiotics and film, which had absolutely nothing to do with architecture, but it helped me visualize ways to develop narratives, to think spatially, to think with space, time, and representation. But it was in the course of my graduate education that I became interested in producing work that had social impact. But it's been a long journey to figure out how to work in a conscientious way. So there's another question that's come in, and it is, how do students get involved in this kind of work? What kinds of things do they do in school that are like this, which is a great question.
Yeah, and I think we could answer it two ways. One is students, and we can speak both about what it's like at Taubman College as well as other architecture schools. There's certainly classes that engage these types of ideas, whether it's through design studio or other types of seminars. In the multiple projects that we've shown today, many of them have been funded through grants at the university here, and that means that a number of students have been involved in both the design and construction of all of these projects as well. So I'd say at Michigan, even thinking about innovation in some ways, we do try and have the students involved in this type of work, almost as a precursor to what they might find ideally in practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. In both in the kind of studio teaching, the seminars, as well as some of the post-professional programs that we have here, we really try to teach students these approaches and these methods. And I think the reason why we're all here and we're all part of this discussion is because this is where we really think some of the future of architecture lies, and this is kind of at the core of a lot of the teaching, and as Carl said, a lot of the collaboration that we have with students, both through courses, but also through internships and research assistance on these projects.
It's really an exceptional opportunity to work with students on projects such as Research Through Making or Research on the City, which are specific to programs that are run at Taubman College, among other universities that I'm sure also run similar programs. But it gives folks in architectural practice the possibility of speculative work with very large teams that are working in the built environment and testing ideas materially. I think that's a wonderful way to get involved in projects of this type.
Yeah, and there's another question that just came in too, which asked about, do these types of projects, like how do we think about costs for them? And I'd say that this is something that we are managing, and we are thinking about how much something costs to build. We don't always have large budgets, so while we might think and use innovative technology or innovative techniques, we're very concerned about how they find themselves either in Detroit or in the city in general or in the mega region.
And in many ways, we think not only about the costs that go into constructing one of these types of projects, but how they can be generative or operative or entrepreneurial, or how they could produce economic value from the very logic of how they're produced or sustained.
And maybe Carl, I'm going to press you a little bit, because I think that you can really talk about the cost implications of prefabrication, especially with the Blue Homes work. The benefits of these kinds of systems are not only in terms of speed of construction time, but there's also cost benefits, environmental benefits, and maybe you can just talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. I think there's also quality benefits. The way that we build something, at least in that case in a factory, meant that it wasn't exposed to the weather during construction. There was also a social component, thinking about the people that we work with building these projects, whether they're building them out in the environment when it's freezing cold or sweltering hot, the ability to do that in a factory. So I think the innovations in design allow us to really consider a number of aspects. And I'd say that we also are excited by these innovations because it allows us to maybe consider more things than we were able to consider in the past.
So maybe this might be the last question as we're getting to the end of our session, and it has to do with the possibility of pursuing multiple approaches to architecture simultaneously as someone might become involved as a graduate or undergraduate student. And I guess the question is it possible to have multiple interests within the field, and how does one manage one's multiple interests as a student?
Lots of coffee, but yeah, I mean, I went, and this is Kathy speaking again, and the work that I showed was the urban scale of work, but if you recall the first slide, we also work within the space of technology, sensing, material systems, and building envelopes. So we actually work at two drastically different scales with very different technologies, and while this may seem like a kind of schizophrenic practice, it's also very invigorating because you're constantly shifting perspective. But all of these scales, as I said, are really interconnected through ideas of the ecology of buildings, the way that buildings operate as ecologies, from just the scale of a material or a technology or the method of manufacture to the scale of a large urban infrastructural project. And so what we do is maintain a kind of larger philosophical agenda that ties these different scales together. So it's definitely possible. You need a lot of energy, a lot of collaboration, and the ability to kind of change your focus quite quickly. But that's something that architecture students and architects are really trained to do, and that's what and probably that's what really one of the real things that we train people for in architecture school is to be able to think simultaneously through multiple aspects of at the same time, through multiple scales, from thinking about people to technology within one breath, within one project, and really to synthesize these in a kind of coherent vision.
Which is a very contemporary approach to practice.
Yeah.
So I think that's about all the time that we have for questions. The three of us represent three different types of practices, but I think you'll find exposure to all of these things both at Taubman College and in other programs. And it's easy enough to find any of us if you have additional questions, either through the college website, but then there's also the virtual exhibition. So if you have questions, you can also visit us at that virtual exhibition through the ACSA.
Yep, and these are the some of the sites that you can connect through if you want to find out more about any of these projects and the work that we've been doing. So thank you for joining in.
Thanks for your time, and good luck.